Thank you, Karen. I'd like to thank you and the organisers for the opportunity to speak. I'm not really here to teach you anything, or that, as in we've had some great speakers and you're not going to really learn anything from me. I'm really here. The only reason I got asked was because of this is in Adelaide next year and they thought they'd better do. Let me see if I can work the bottom one. No? Oh yeah, okay. So South Australia is a little bit unique. We're small compared to many of the other states, and if you remember the early talk by Prem, he put up all the centres that did surgery, and Adelaide didn't have one. South Australia's got a population of less than 2 million. Most of those are actually in Adelaide, Greater Adelaide, and that compares to a population of 24 million in Australia. Bit of a population graph, as you can see. South Australia is the bit down the bottom there. You might remember your school geography. But if you look at the colour, most of it's desert and doesn't have any people. So the population is reasonably closely condensed down the bottom bit there. Adelaide's, I haven't got or do I have a pointer? No. So Adelaide, you can see there, down the bottom there, thank you. And that's where most of the population is. We do clinics up in Port Augusta, which is at the top of the Gulf there, and down in Mount Gambier. Did I do that? No. Down in Mount Gambier, down at the bottom near Victoria. We also do clinics in Mildura, which is actually in Victoria, but closer to us. I'll talk in a minute about our role in the Northern Territory as well. So we're based at the Women's and Children's Hospital. That's separate from what you might have heard in the media about that ridiculously expensive hospital that just opened up for the adults. But we're at the Women's and Children's. It's not that far from there. It's close to the centre of the city. There's 4 paediatric cardiologists with about 3.5 FTE. FTE's being full-time equivalent for the non-public service for the people. We also have for our adult congenital cardiology service, we have one trained adult congenital cardiologist who does clinics at the Royal Adelaide and also privately. So I mentioned we do our paediatric clinics at the Women's and Children's Hospital. There's some private clinics outside. Flinders Medical Centre is another large hospital in the southern part of Adelaide. We do peripherally in Mount Gambier, Port Augusta and Mildura. But we also have some work in the Northern Territory. Traditionally, Adelaide's had a very long-standing association with the Northern Territory Health Department, both for all areas, not just cardiology. And we have done for a long time clinics in both Alice Springs and Darwin. More recently, Darwin's employed its own paediatric cardiologist who's doing a brilliant job up there. But we still do clinics up there 4 times a year for a week each to support her. We do regular clinics in Alice Springs and offer a 24-hour telephone echo reporting service for Alice Springs. As I mentioned, we do not have a paediatric cardiac surgical service. It's a very specialised field, as you're all aware, and our population doesn't really allow that. There are some minor procedures, a few duct ligations in the neonates and older children, but most of it is set elsewhere. We do cardiac catheter in the Women's and Children's, but we do limited interventional procedures because we don't have the backup. So most of the cardiac patients get sent to Melbourne, to Ian and his group. We will deliver all but the most high risk, particularly the hyplastic left, in Adelaide and transfer postnatally. That includes most of the single ventricles who will go on the Fontan pathway. So our service pays obviously for the child, either commercial flights if they're well enough, or air ambulance. We pay for both parents to travel and support their accommodation and meals to some extent. On average, we're sending about 110 to 120 patients each year for various surgeries and some more complicated interventional procedures. So I had a look through our database just along these lines to look at what we're doing. This is only in the paediatric group from up to 18 years of age, so I haven't included 18-year-olds, but so we have 38 Fontan patients under our care. That includes 2 actually from Alice Springs. I've included those because we are the sole service provider for them. 4 of those patients have moved to South Australia from interstate, either post-Fontan or interstage, and there were 35 born in South Australia, but one of those has moved elsewhere subsequently. So if you look at the numbers of the age groups, they do vary. Sort of age with the numbers. This is what I found interesting looking through these numbers, just comparing what were postnatal and antenatal diagnoses. As you can see, the vast majority of those 35 patients were antenatally diagnosed, and the youngest one that was postnatally diagnosed is presently 13 years of age. So that brings up a rather important role of the fetal cardiologist, and that's my particular interest as mentioned. So many of you would be in this boat, but just to go through it, I mean, the diagnosis is made around the time of the morphology scan, around 20 weeks gestation. Obviously, it's an exceedingly stressful time, as we heard earlier, for the family. They go in for thinking they're going to have a normal child and find out the sex and everything's going well until they see someone's face drop. Unfortunately, the families need to make a very rapid decision. I mean, it changes between state to state depending on the different laws. But obviously, the main decision they need to make is will they continue or will they terminate? And they have to make that decision, say in South Australia, where termination is allowed up to 23 weeks. Many of these patients aren't diagnosed. They might have their morphology at 20 weeks outside. They get to see me or my colleagues as quickly as possible, but usually not for another 4 or 5 days. And they're told the news, and then they've got to digest that information and make a decision. And it's the fetal cardiologist who's responsible for that counselling, and really emphasises the important role of the Fontan registry that gives us up-to-date information about the outcome for Fontan patients, so we can pass it on. Really, without this registry information, I would have been 10 years ago, I was sort of talking about maybe they'd last, children would last till 30, maybe 40, but I mean, here in this room we know that that's actually not the real case. This Fontan registry is showing us what we're actually, the long-term outcome is, and it's a lot better than we all thought, and that's the information we need to pass on. I don't want to tell people what to do, but I need to give them the accurate information so they can make an informed decision. So going back to South Australia, there are some advantages of being a small service. I feel I've worked in many places around the world and in Australia. Actually, I've worked here in Brisbane. I'm actually a Queenslander by birth. Did my training here, my paediatric training and a bit of my early cardiology. I've worked in Perth as well, and I've worked in a couple of centres in the UK. South Australia, Adelaide's the smallest place, certain unit I've worked in, but I can see advantages. We're a small service with the 4 cardiologists. I think the families get to know not just their cardiologist, but the others. So if they have a problem when their cardiologist is out of town, not available, they feel comfortable being able to get advice from one of my colleagues. They also have a very close relationship with our cardiac nurses. I'm sure that happens here as well, but again, it's very personal. When they're in hospital, they do tend to get a very close relationship, and I think that really helps them. I think I've missed something here, sorry. The disadvantages. There are disadvantages. The biggest is, in preparation for this talk, I actually sat down and spoke to a few families parents about what they felt, and the big overwhelming disadvantage they said was going interstate for their surgery. And I'm sure this is the same for many of you who live in country. Going from your country town to even here in Brisbane or whatever state you are would be the same. I just had someone just the other week, a mother of twins who was in tears in my office just explaining it was just horrible. She had to leave her supports, her family members. We send her and a partner over, but we can't pay for extended families. Some extended families do go across, but it's at their own expense, and not everyone can afford that. So they find that they're away from those supports. You can tell them till you're blue in the face what they expect, and until they get there, they don't know. And even when they go back for their second time, they still find it very isolating. Financially, even though we try to pay for as much as we can, the flights, some accommodation is covered. Heart Kids has been very supportive for our families when they travel. They offer food vouchers and other things. Some of the more difficult social situations they'll pay for extra family members and stuff like that. They're a great resource for us. But there's still many out-of-pocket expenses that can't be the same as living in your own house and travelling to the hospital. It costs money. And secondly, they're away from work. The mother, of course, is probably hopefully being funded by maternal leave, but the father can't. If the father's going to come across, he's got to take leave from work. It's often not holiday, although we can plan for it. But it does get difficult. And that's really the biggest disadvantage that all the families seem to talk about. Transition is probably another advantage we have. Again, being a small unit, we're able to do our transition a little bit easier. As I said, we've got the one adult congenital cardiologist. We do our transition clinic in the paediatric outpatients, where the patient's been coming for the last 18 years. We have our department where we do our outpatients, all our echoes, and they know that area. So when they're transitioning, from the last time I see them, I'll go out and we'll make that appointment for them with the same secretaries they've been making the appointments with, and then that next appointment will be there in the department, same as what they're used to. Patrick, our adult congenital cardiologist, will then see them maybe once if they're ready to move on. He'll make that decision. Sometimes he'll see them 2 or 3 times in that setting before he'll see them outside. During that time, he'll take the opportunity to scour through our records, our electronic database, and the medical records. And some, as many of you know, we've still got paper notes, and some of those are as 5 or 6, maybe even more volumes, with somewhere in there are some old surgical reports, etc., that he needs for his knowledge when they move on. So I think overall, being a small unit, that is a big advantage for us. So really that's all I had to say about the South Australian experience. We work very closely, particularly with our Melbourne colleagues, as we feel that we're sort of nearly part of their service, or are part of their service. And I don't really think I've got anything extra to add. But we've got this meeting next year in Adelaide, and I'd like to welcome you along if you could come along. Adelaide actually is quite a nice place to visit. As I said, I'm from Queensland. I've been there for about 13, 14 years. I hate the weather still. It's cold, miserable, even this time of year at times. The football's odd. They had this funny round field, and they knock on, and they don't know how to tackle, and that sort of stuff. But there are some good things. So Adelaide itself's quite a lovely city, great for bringing up kids. Not too big. Traffic's, well, there's usually peak half hour. It's very, very nice from that point of view. I ride to work a lot of days. It's easy, even in the weather. But there's some great stuff outside. So I'm just sort of priming you for coming to this meeting, spending a day at the meeting and spending a bit of time then on holiday. Adelaide Hills is just right next to, it's 15 minutes from the city centre, and you're in the Adelaide Hills. Beautiful area. It's got some great wineries. great scenery, old buildings. Barossa Valley, more wineries. Other great scenery, beautiful place, 2 or 3 hours from Adelaide, absolutely gorgeous. There are some other wine areas in South Australia as well, but you might think we drink too much, but the Clare Valley's not far, the McLaren Vale's not far. If you really want to get more wines, you can go down to Coonawarra. But it's not all wine. There's another place, Coonawarra. Sorry, it's not Coonawarra, it's another wine place. The Coorong. Anyone who's ever read Storm Boy, I bring it up mainly because my son just finished reading it now. That's the Coonawarra, and it's a beautiful... Oh, sorry, I drink too much wine. It's the Coorong. There's no wine in... although it's not far, you have to go through McLaren Vale to get to it. Sorry. So the Coorong, beautiful national park, absolutely gorgeous scenery. So there's lots and lots to see. So come along, enjoy the meeting we'll put on, but enjoy the scenery as well.